All right, we begin episode 37. To switch things back to what they were a couple weeks ago. I know we started episode 35 with Jeff Mlinar, then shifted to our normal weekly interview. Last week we flip-flopped it. Now this week we're going to flip-flop it back. A little later than usual too, because if any of you saw me over the weekend, you thought I looked fine. I'm telling you now, it was a hell of an act by me. It was an Oscar-winning performance because me at Hudson Valley was not good. Survived, but not good. But yeah, I was under the weather basically for the last week. Pretty much since episode 36 was posted. But we're good. Figured things out. Thank God for my primary care physician and blood work and all that jazz. But that all being said, now we've gotten all that out of the way. Jeff Mlinar, Empire State Takeover. Sir, we are another week in, another step closer to an exciting week of holiday shenanigans in the near future. How you doing, good sir?
Not bad. I don't know. Felt a little. It was one of those like I'm in my 30s and it's not the first year doing this anymore. Stretches where by the time I got back from a 3-day jaunt in Scranton over the weekend, I was dragging a little bit, but we're good. Couple days spent within an hour of home, maybe a couple more to in the middle of the week. So we're all good. Rested, catching up on website stuff. Can't complain.
Excellent.
Last full week of regular scheduling before we get to kind of the craziness that is the holiday week. So
yeah, exactly. Take a look back at as we're recording this on Wednesday, the 18th of December. We're going to look back at the week of Monday, December 9th. My math's correct. 18 minus 2, then minus 7. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, 9th. I know how to do maths.
Boy.
Monday, December 9th. The two main attractions you attended personally involving Section 2 was Averill Park at Shaker that Tuesday night, which was also a special fundraiser for pancreatic cancer research in memory of the mother of Jayla Jeter, who unfortunately passed away from complications with that disease. And then Stillwater at Greenwich was last Thursday night. In the end, Shaker at AP was a nip and tuck kind of first half, but then Shaker basically gradually increased the deficit against Averill Park and ended up winning by, I think it was around 20, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And then Stillwater at Greenwich that Thursday night, kind of the same. Same song, second verse, except Greenwich played the role of Shaker and Stillwater played the role of Averill Park. In that once the Wolf sisters really got going in that second half, Greenwich was able to pull away from Stillwater. What were your takeaways from those two games specifically?
Yeah, I've appointed myself in the past the commander of chaos because whenever I show up, weird stuff tends to happen. But apparently I'm the commander of 20 pieces right now because a lot of times when I've been attending games this year, it's been kind of commanding, whether it's commanding team performances from the jump or one team that steadily wears the other down and grinds on them over the course of 32 minutes. And those were both, Shaker beat Averill Park 65-44, close at half. Just the first, even though it was close at half, the first half kind of set the stage for what the second half was going to be. And then I felt kind of the same about Greenwich Stillwater, where Greenwich took that one also on their home court by 20, where close at half, but the first half set the stage for what the third quarter was. We'll start with Shaker AP. I had one of the officials late in the first half during a timeout ask me if it was going how I thought it was going to go. And at that point, the score was somewhere in the 32 to 30 to 27. It was somewhere in the 30 range. We were late in the first half. He asked me if I thought, or if that's how I thought it was going to go, and I said, kind of, but higher scoring than I expected. And that was another way of saying, I think we've mentioned it on here at least once before. Averill Park to me isn't a team this year that's one of those 60, 70 point teams like they've had in the last 2 or 3 years, where they could win games in the 60s and approaching 70. This is more like a 40s, low 50s team, reminiscent of some of the teams that they had that, again, won in the late 2010s. Then I lost my train of thought.
Averill Park, late 2010s, like with Amelia Wood and Lombardini, or
So Mallory Wood, Steph Jankovic. So yeah, those sorts of teams were 40s, low 50s, and this group kind of reminiscent of that. Just kind of grinding out some games. So they kept pace with Shaker being able to score 30 plus in the first half, but it was one that I didn't get the feel that if it remained that way, they were going to be able to keep up over the course of 32 minutes. And kind of sure enough, in the second half, Shaker continued, work their way, pounding the post, and just steadily separated. And again, it was kind of like early season woes at the same time for Averill Park, where Shaker started off playing like an extended 3-2 with Jayla up top and Giada and Sophia Lanny at the wings. And when they played that 3-2, yes, there's zone offense that you play against it, but you're getting trapped, and part of that is instinctual offense. And then when Shaker switched and went man late first half and then into the second half, there was AP had some struggles with their man-to-man offense, and it wasn't so much like indecision or lack of aggressiveness willing to attack Shaker's size and athleticism. It was just some of those, just lack of a better way of putting it, not everybody being confident in knowing the play or knowing the action, kind of getting lost in their actions, where somebody maybe was supposed to cut through and instead they turned it the opposite direction, like they were going to get a handoff, or those sorts of things. So things were a little bit ragged at times with the half court offense. It's early December and it's Averill Park. You expect, like, those are sorts of things that a Coach Oregon and Keegan program, those fix themselves. Those get fixed. That sort of problem gets fixed over the course of a season. But just kind of early, just an early December whoa for them in that game. And then we'll fast forward. Oh, I should also bring up before I go to Thursday, Shaker, you brought up the fundraiser in memory of Jayla Jeter's mother that Jayla put on. Maybe once a year in my coverage region, or once every other year, there's something like this that kind of makes me marvel at the maturity of our young people. And Jayla putting that together, and she had a speech before the game, an emotional speech in front of everybody, and just the process of the thought process of putting that on and having that event be a success, be facing everybody like that, and then on top of that, the game that she produced, she was a steadying force in that game, both ends of the floor, scored herself, made it work in the half court, getting the ball into the post, fueled transition opportunities, just kind of did everything right for that team. Just kind of made me marvel at the maturity. I've felt like she's somebody that carries herself in a more mature way than your average person her age, but just the strength and maturity of Jayla, and it really showed. It's something to be proud of for sure. And then, so moving from that and moving forward to Thursday, Greenwich Stillwater, kind of another early season thing. Greenwich has grinded out some wins in the first couple weeks. That we discussed over the weekend when they played the 2 games in the Delhi tournament, and first halves didn't go well, and they came out guns blazing in the third quarter. And then I wasn't at the Mechanicville game Monday, but it felt, it sounded like it was kind of the same thing where it was all square at half or pretty even at half. And then Brooke Kuzmic had a big third quarter, so Greenwich had a big third quarter, and they were able to separate. If you just look at the box score from the surface on Thursday with the Stillwater game, it appears as though it was the same thing. But now it was kind of more than meets the eye. The scoreboard was close in the first half, but I felt like Greenwich really kind of had the better of play, and it set the stage for what the second half became. It was just the fact of they didn't score enough in the first half to really have that kind of separation. I think it was somewhere in the low 20s, because the last few minutes of the half was pretty scratchy. But Greenwich won. Definitely, they won the physicality battle early, and we don't talk about time of possession as a basketball stat. We talk about that as a football stat. So it's not something that's necessarily quantified. But Stillwater early on in that game found out that it sucks to play defense for a long time, because there were numerous occasions where they play a good, solid half-court defensive possession. Greenwich has to put up kind of a late clock attempt, 3 to 5 seconds left on the shot clock. And a lot of times when I say they, I should say she, Olivia Davis wins a physical battle, grabs an offensive rebound, or kind of takes 2 people with her that allows somebody like Jordan or Bailey Wolf or Brooke Kuzmic to swoop in and grab a mid-area offensive rebound. And then they have to play defense again for another 15 to 20 seconds before Greenwich, a lot of times, ends up scoring. So there were numerous occasions in the first half of that game where it was Stillwater had to play, there was 1 minute of clock, and Stillwater had to play defense for 46 to 48 seconds of it. That sucks. So that, I felt like that part of it, that kind of steadily wore them down. And then it's another early season thing. They've won, they've found ways to win, but it hasn't necessarily been crisp for them. With Bailey and Jordan Wolf in the fold, they've been trying to figure some stuff out. They've been trying to figure out just some role things across the team. They've been trying to figure out the balance, and Bailey and Jordan hadn't quite got their sea legs under them yet. So again, early season, you see certain things on, if you're using previous game film scout on Greenwich, you see some things that might not necessarily be the case of what it actually is once they get their legs under them. And there were some cross matchups, and Bailey really took advantage of it. She can definitely shoot the basketball. There's no 2 ways about it. She's a shooter, but she is more of she's just as much of an athlete, being able to put the ball on the floor, especially when she's able to get to her right hand. She's athletic, she's athletic and gets off the floor pretty well when she's able to go that way, jump off her left foot, all that. Finishes high. So they were playing her a little bit more, and they matched up with her a little bit more as a shooter reliant, somebody that relies on the three, and she was just blown by kids. So that was able, I thought they got caught in some cross matchups that didn't allow Bailey, but made it easier for Bailey to kind of get off. So good win by Greenwich on Thursday. It's the first time, I'll be honest, Stillwater's had a good go of it early in the season. I watched them scrimmage Boston Spa, and I know scrimmage doesn't count on the record, but they looked particularly good in that scrimmage. And then they beat Guilderland by 20 plus, and then they blew somebody else out, and this was the first time that they really kind of got punched in the mouth and they got tested. They didn't respond that well. Like, there were body language issues and those sorts of things, but it's early in the season. That you grow from that. You learn from that, you grow from it, and you want that sort of early season experience to try to build from. So even though it didn't go well for Stillwater, that's you don't want the first time that you feel that to be at the end of February. You want the second week of December. You learn and build fixable things and move forward. So, yeah, those were last week the only 2 Section 2 games that I had.
Yep. And then just to follow up on that with Stillwater real quick, including this past their game the other night at home against Hoosick Falls, they have a stretch of 8 games to prepare themselves for what's really going to be their most challenging back-to-back stretch of the season, in my opinion, when they are going to Mechanicville January 21st, and then they come back home for a rematch with Greenwich 2 nights later. So they get a nice, half dozen or so games under their belts to, keep working, keep grinding along, and see if maybe things can change a little bit for them in that regard. As far as the shaking,
interesting how that Wazarin schedule works, because Greenwich had that same slate last week, and now it's going to be Stillwater the second time around that gets that.
Right. And then just to follow up on the AP Shaker comments real quick, you did mention the defensive change. I also feel like there was a lot more transition, a lot more ease into transition buckets for Shaker in the second half, whereas first half, it was a lot more plotting. Granted, teams were scoring at a good rate, but again, it was a lot more of a plotting first half, whereas Shaker in the second half, they were able to get out, use their athleticism a little bit more, and run and create transition buckets. And that was, kind of one hand feeds the other, where you change your defense and it leads to some more open opportunities in the open floor. And that's what really was undoing in that regard to AP in that game. But then AP turns right back around. They beat Burn Hills Walston Lake on Friday night, and then they lose a close one to CNS, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. So let's go to Class D real quick. Not a whole lot really caught my eye from Class D this week. Really just 2 things. One, if this doesn't scream small school New York, I don't know what does, but Johnstown and Northville, they had to reschedule their game that was for last Wednesday. They had to reschedule to February. Jeff, would you like to guess the reason why they had to reschedule?
Kids plowed in the bus garage as a senior prank.
It was a school concert night.
Okay.
So they went with the school concert over the basketball game, and that's why they moved the game back 2 months. So
that'll happen.
Yeah, if that doesn't scream small school New York, I don't know what does. But yeah, so that was done. The only on the court though thing that really caught my eye, well, Hartford, they go on the road to Whitehall and go down by 20 there. That just really generally caught my eye because we were talking a little bit the last week or two about how, if you're looking aside from Northville, a lot of the conversation would start and end with Spa Catholic and Hartford. Right now, Hartford is still, I know early season, but they're still trying to find their sea legs right now under Coach Johnson, trying to figure things out, so to speak, as things are going right now.
Yeah, consistency, right? I think we could talk about this. It's a word that I brought up probably a half dozen times last week, and I could harp on it again this week. But, just as far as finding consistency, and it is early season. They beat Spa Catholic the week before, and then that result against Whitehall. I will say this. I'll be honest. I don't know the names of Whitehall kids. Sam Holland graduated, so I don't like the current Whitehall group. I don't know the names. I did watch them in Summer League. And Summer League, you just kind of take from it what you will. But I went up to they play in the Summer League in Hudson Falls, which has pretty much all of the main schools in that northern section 2, like Foothills North and Adirondack League and Wazarin. So I watched them there. They were better than I thought they were. I still remember this from early July. They were better than I thought they were going to be.
All juniors and seniors, by the way. 10 deep on Whitehall, all juniors and seniors.
That's interesting, because when I watched them at the Summer League, they looked young. They look kind of small and they look young in the face. So I expect them to be a younger team. So I didn't anticipate them all being juniors and seniors. But I did see them there, and I was pleasantly surprised with how they looked. They kind of played Hoosier Z there. That was my takeaway. It was a lot of not much dribble, a lot of pass, cut, pass, swing. Relatively fundamentally sound. Like nobody trying to do too much. So Whitehall's had a little bit of a run, just as within the Adirondack League. I think they won an Adirondack League championship 2 years ago, maybe 2, 3, something like that. A couple of years. They've been competitive in the northern reaches of Section 2. They've made a semifinal. They made a couple semifinals, I think. And I think they bumped into Dwaynesburg at Hudson Valley one year, and then there may have been another year. They did bump into Dwaynesburg at Hudson Valley, and that one may have been a split. I think that was a year where they went CCC, and it was technically a final.
That would have
might have been the year that Greenwich beat Dwaynesburg in the overall.
Yeah, that would have been 2 years ago. Yep.
Yeah. Whitehall made it to Hudson Valley to play Dwaynesburg. And there was another year where they made a little bit of a run. So it's not like total anonymity for the Railroaders, but yeah, I mean that did catch my eye a little bit when I saw that, but then I remembered at the Hudson Falls Summer League they didn't look half bad. So good for Whitehall.
Moving on to Class C, 2 teams that are really establishing themselves. Actually, one in Class C, I should say. I apologize, I mislabeled one. One team that just keeps chugging along and just producing with what's been put in front of them in the schedule so far. OESJ, 4-0 against Section 2 teams, 5-0 overall. They got a pair of games this week. They got one tonight at Notre Dame Bishop Gibbons. But then they get 2 back-to-back tests coming up this Friday, home against Berne-Knox-Westerlo, which I will deem is very important that it's at home, because that travel to BKW can be something, especially coming from OESJ. And then on their schedule, unless they play anything during the holiday for a tournament or anything, they basically get about 3 weeks off to prepare for Northville after that BKW game. So scheduling-wise, things setting up very nice here for OESJ, where even if they do slip up against the Bulldogs Friday night this week, they get that 2.5 to 3 weeks to recover and get ready for Haley Monroe and company when they go on the road to Northville. But as far as what they did last week, they took care of business against Dwaynesburg at home, and they took care of Mayfield, winning each by 20. So, OESJ, they're putting themselves in prime position to put themselves, in a pretty good seating. I know we're still, obviously 2 months away from seating the sectionals, but with this way things have started, all it can do is just help build confidence, build momentum, and maybe we see things kind of get a little flipped over when it comes to that BKW game on Friday or Northville once we get into January.
Yeah, that's you play who you have in front of you, and OESJ has done just that. I think they've only lost one game this year, I believe. Yeah, I'm just kind of fact checking myself. They lost 1 by 5 to Richfield Springs in the West Canada tip-off tournament, which Richfield, again, small school. They were Section 3 when I was in high school. Now they're in Section 4. But Richfield, not bad, small school this year. Like they've got some pieces, so that's a competitive game. It was a 5-point game, but yeah. Besides that, you play who's in front of you. The talk before the year, and this was kind of what my expectation was whenever I talk to anyone about the WAC, was Berne, Northville, Berne, Northville, Berne, Northville, and there was only one person that had said anything to me about OESJ, and coincidentally or not coincidentally was Tom Galvin at Berne, where he said, OESJ is one to watch out for. Like that's they're going to be improved, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, they have slid into being that third team to talk about in the WAC, and then they've also kind of slid into, like, Class C has shown maybe what I would expect to be kind of a Power 4 or Power 2 and 2 right behind them, or what, however you want to call it, but with the Greenwich, Stillwater, Berne, and Maple Hill. And then the question was, who else? Is there anyone else? Who else? Is it Whitehall? We just brought up. OESJ has certainly made their case as far as they were a quarterfinalist team last year that they were either the 8 or 9 seed, so they had to deal with Greenwich at Greenwich. So that didn't go particularly well, but yeah, they've slid into that. Who's the next one to talk about after the ones that are kind of the known commodities? And yeah, it's it's looking like it might be the best, definitely most competitive within their environment sort of team that they've had since those schools merged over a decade ago at this point. So I know that the scout on, like, going into the Dwaynesburg game, I talked a little bit with Pat O'Hanlon. Pat is, even though Allison graduated, Pat is back on the staff at Dwaynesburg. And kind of going into that game, it was guards that were producing, like 3 kids that can shoot the ball. And then in that game, they've got a forward that I watched OESJ last year. And I remember this kid. They've got kind of an athletic, cleaner forward in Taylor Hayes. And Taylor had 20 plus in the first half against Dwaynesburg. So they have a little bit of positional balance, as far as guards that can stretch the floor, shoot it. They're athletic forward that can be a double-double producer for them. So, yeah, just with how they're early season results have gone, it makes Friday's game against Berne a little bit more interesting. But at the same time, it's also one, clearly judging by the conversation I had with Coach Galvin a few weeks ago, it's not one that's like sneaking up on him either. You know, it's not one that he looked past and now all of a sudden he might be paying attention to. OESJ had his eye a month ago. So interesting dynamic. They've had a nice start to the season. That was a good, I thought last week the schedule was a pretty good barometer, playing Dwaynesburg and Mayfield, as far as how does this shape up? How does the WAC shape up outside of these two that we really know about? And those were, I guess they kind of showed how it shapes up, at least right now in mid-December, in pretty resounding fashion.
And then, just to follow up on BKW, by the way, they took care of Cobleskill last week. And as we're recording this on Wednesday, the 18th, they have a matchup tonight against Dwaynesburg to prep for that OESJ game on Friday. So there's your Dwaynesburg link into everything as well that you just mentioned. Class B, bunch of stuff that caught my eye. First off, Coxsackie Athens, they were able to survive against Maple Hill at home, end up winning that game in single digits. I believe it was a 4-point win, if I remember correctly. Then they took care of business at Johnstown. So Coxsackie Athens sitting right up there along the top of Class B. Mechanicville, they had lost to Greenwich earlier in the week. Then they bounced back with a win over Hoosick Falls. And then 2 days ago on Monday, I swore to myself I wouldn't touch on this week yet, but a 1-point win at Tamarack. A team in Tamarack that had just come off a big runaway victory at Waterford Half Moon. So to see Tamarack not just compete, but come within that close of taking down who a lot of people considered a front runner for Class B, very intriguing in that regard. So let's focus in on that with Mechanicville and their run they had. They lose to Greenwich, bounce back against Hoosick Falls, then they're able to hang on the other night against Tamarack.
Yeah, and I might skip right forward to the Tamarack game because the Greenwich one is what it is. That's more of a Wazarin supremacy sort of thing. And I kind of spoke on it a touch talking about Greenwich already. And the Hoosick Falls one, I also feel the same thing. Kind of was what it was. Tamarack, I wasn't at that game simply because Monday I went up to the southern reaches of Section 7 for different reasons. Ticonderoga played at Bolton. I think Bolton has just as a quick aside, I think Bolton has the talent to make a run, at least up there in Class D in Section 7. But when I looked at their schedule, it's not good at all. So it's very difficult to get like a legitimate functional eye on their players and their team to try to learn about them. And I know, Ticonderoga is probably the best team that they would play this year. So I just kind of looked at it and it was at Bolton. Bolton's a little bit closer. It's about as close as you can get while being in Section 7. They were Section 2 when I started. They were Adirondack League, and they changed section and league affiliations. But Monday I was like, I got to go up to Bolton. I got to watch them. I got to, just get eyes on them because I'm not going to do it against some of these teams that they're going to beat 60-10. If that game wasn't that day, I would have went to Mechanicville Tamarack, and I missed a good one. So the interesting thing that caught my eye was the fact that Tamarack jumped on them early. It was a double-digit margin in the first quarter, 20-9 or 21-9, and Mechanicville had to claw back on the road. And because I wasn't there, I could take that a couple different ways. I could take that as a mark of resilience in favor of Mechanicville, Mechanicville showing kind of winning mettle, when things don't go your way early and you're able to claw back in and just find a way to win. I could take that as just another example of the openness of Class B. That, any given day it could be. I could take that as, that is, Tamarack is right there. And the other thing that I know that I will take it as is Tamarack's a tough place to play. I've long stood by this. I think that their gym is one of the toughest to get if not the toughest to get a win in Section 2. I think it's just, if you've been in that gym, you get it. It's a box. It's very small, maybe about 3-4 rows of bleachers each way. You get 100 people in there. It's a packed house. And just that, whether it's the acoustics, how noise reverberates off the walls, it feels loud. It feels kind of frenzied, chaotic in there. It's a tough place for a visiting team to go and come out with a win. And that's as long as if Tamarack's able to get, they put themselves in a situation where, later in the year, when we're talking playoff time, they're able to get a couple home games. That's a really tough place to go get a win. And that's a good, just looking at it from the surface, that's a solid road win for Mechanicville and being able to claw back after faltering early.
And then I mentioned Cooksaki Athens as well. Surviving at home against Maple Hill in what was a 3-point win. Excuse me, I said 4 earlier, 47-44. Then they went on the road Saturday. I think it was technically an afternoon tip-off, if I remember correctly. I think it was like a 1 o'clock tip-off. I might be wrong on that. I'm sure Johnstown head coach Megan Anagnostopoulos probably would like to not remember either. But Cooksaki Athens took care of Johnstown there. Putting Bailey Brisky now, by the way, 38 points away from 1,000. They have a game tonight at Chatham and then Saturday home against Lansingburg. Things lining up pretty good right now for Cooksaki Athens. They got through what I would say was their first real tough challenge in Class B with Maple Hill. They took care of that at home, and now they've got themselves lined up for really, it's things are looking real good for them as things line up right now schedule-wise, over the next few weeks. And Cooksaki Athens could really solidify that resume as being, a team that's sitting right there in that ballpark with Mechanicville. Don't want to forget about LaSalle and the way they've started out. You mentioned Tamarack, Catskill, with what they've been able to do so far in the early part of their schedule. That seems to be like the real forefront of Class B as of right now, as it looks. Your thought on CA and what the Riverhawks are doing?
Yeah, I thought the result against Maple Hill, another one not being there, so just kind of taking it at the surface, was that feels like the sort of thing where I could take positives from it both ways. Where if you're Cooksaki, you beat Maple Hill. That's a benchmark sort of get over the hump win against a good team and a top challenger within your area and your environment that you play in. And then if you're Maple Hill, that was their season opener, playing against a pretty talented team that already has got a couple, they have a little bit of game experience at that point. They had already played a couple games. It was on their home court and it was a 1-possession game. So, I felt like, that could have been a trap scenario for Maple Hill, where just the jumping right into a game that we would consider a big game on the road. And they competed. They were within a possession. So, I could look at it and take positives from both sides, but yeah, that's just, I guess Kisaki just kind of doing what I expected, really. You have Bailey's put up big numbers, and she's one of the most gifted players within the field that she plays in. And if they were able to get a second one go, if they were, and that second one being Reagan Helen, if they're able to get that second one going, then that turns them into a team that can score enough to beat opponents. That turns them into a team that you can't just like junk defense Bailey and dare everybody else to beat you and have success with it. And they got her going from the jump, and they've it's not just those two. They defend, they're scrappy, they're supporting cast kids. I feel like for the most part, like they generally kind of know their roles, productive on the defensive end, feed off of what the other two are, feed off of what they're able to produce as far as drawing extra bodies, hit some open shots, grab offensive rebounds, stuff like they serve their roles well. But yeah, the first kind of real test for Kisaki they passed, and yeah, within their environment, there's a lot of wins on that schedule.
And to follow up on, you mentioned Regan. She actually had the 2 free throws at the very end that made it a 2-possession game. Which obviously I said they only won by 3, but she made the 2 free throws with I think it was 11 seconds left, something like that. That made it a 2-possession game, and for lack of intents and purposes, essentially closed the game out for Kisaki Athens. So definitely a good win for them. I mentioned Catskill, and that's how I'll close out Class B for us. They just keep taking care of what's in front of them. They took care of Hudson, Rhinebeck, and Greenville last week. They end up winning at Taconic Hills last night on Tuesday the 17th. And Ava Edmond just, there's a lot of supporting characters that are playing their roles and playing them well so far. But, you'd be remiss if you didn't look at this Catskill team and begin by talking about Ava Edmond in some shape, way, or form, which just is a double machine to start out this season for the Cats.
Yeah, she's been putting up numbers since Janae was there. She hasn't got the attention or the publicity because the first half of her high school career, Janae was there and she was putting up big numbers, but she's able to kind of feed off of Janae too. And, she was very valuable for them, but a lot of that was feeding off the attention that Janae garnered. And she also doesn't get that attention and publicity necessarily because a couple different things, like the Patroon doesn't get that kind of love. It is what it is. They don't get that kind of attention. And Patroon kids, unless they are Janae and do the sort of things that she did over the course of her high school career, in the greater landscape of Section 2, they don't get talked about as much, or maybe get forgotten about. And even Janae probably didn't get the attention that I feel like she deserves over the course of her high school career from the greater population of Section 2. And then on top of that, Ava is also a softball kid. So she's not somebody that's made her mark playing, AAU basketball, and a name that is, she's not a name that's in like the club basketball circles, even locally, because she is a softball. She's always been a softball first kid. So that's whenever I'd ask, or anyone would ask Coach Quinn about Ava, that's what he'll bring up. He's like, big softball kid, big soft. It's so there's a couple different reasons why that's the case. Whether that's fair or not, it kind of is what it is. But yeah, she's been putting up numbers for years, and You see, I think it was it the Greenville game? Catskill is one where I'm trying to find scores and stats and all of that. Let's be real, in Section 2, it's kind of all over the place right now. There is no true centralized place to be able to find these things. Just because it's not, the Times Union, kind of ticker tape isn't showing the stats right now. So you're kind of bouncing around, looking at the Gazette, looking at the Star. Some Section 2 teams are using the high school sports stats website now that Section 3 has gone to in recent years, but not everybody. So just kind of bouncing around everywhere trying to find information. And with Catskill, the best place is Coach Quinn's Facebook. So I think that was it the Greenville game where she had 26 and 19? And she recently had 26 and 19. And this probably says something about Ava and what she's been able to do in the Patroon in recent years. You see 26 and 19 from a lot of kids, it kind of pops, makes your eyes pop a little bit. I see 26 and 19 from Ava. I'm like, oh, it's 26 and 19 from Ava Edmond.
Yeah, so last night against Taconic Hill, she had 26 and 17.
Maybe it was maybe it was the 26.
Ava she had 17 points in their 7-point win over Greenville. Rhinebeck, she had 12 and 19.
Yeah, it was the Rhinebeck one was probably a blowout, right?
Yeah. Yes. And then I don't see a stat line for the Hudson game, but yeah, I mean that one was also. And then we remember the Cairo game where she just was bananas.
26 and 17. Sorry, my apologies to Greenville. You did better against her than what I gave you credit for. Saying 20, it was 26 and 17 with Taconic, but you see those sorts of stat lines, and that just kind of, she's been doing that for a little while now. And Coach Quinn, whether he's got that, Janae was there for a handful of years, but whether he's had that star or just kind of a group of athletes or whatever it may be, Coach Quinn's always working. He's always doing everything that he can with that group. So, I think that he's done just consistently a nice job with the Cats, and they're just kind of a consistent known commodity at this point in the Patroon. Like, they're just kind of like pizza in the Patroon. Even bad pizza, bad pizza's still fine. If Catskill has a great year, they're great, and if they if they have a down year compared to what they're used to, like they're still fine. So that's
kind of like that quote by Dennis Green when he was head coach for the Arizona Cardinals. They are who we thought they were, kind of thing. But yeah. By the way, do you know who one of the youth softball coaches is in Catskill?
No.
It's kind of a rhetorical question. It's Chris Quinn.
Yes.
So that's probably why one of his first answers about Ava Edmond is, she's a softball girl. She's a softball girl, because he's a softball coach as well. So just just kind of putting that connection out there. Moving on to Class A. Albany Academy, they just moving right along. Kick off the season with 3 wins in a row as they're coming off back-to-back Class B championships, now up to Class A, 3-0 start with wins at Voorheesville, Ravenna, Queens-Selkirk, and Ichabod Crane. And then a battle last night where things came to a head a little bit in Class A. As far as early season returns are concerned, Holy Names, who is coming off wins against Troy and Mahonison, against the Chalmont team who had wins against Cohoes and Troy. They wound up going head-to-head last night, and I'm lost on my I'll lost my score page on what I was looking for. Yeah, okay. So I'm not seeing the score, but
What
they
for Holy Name Shalmot?
yes, I'm
It's tonight.
oh, it's tonight.
It's
Okay.
not it's
I
not
missed the
tonight.
game. I
I
missed
am
the game. I haven't
I'm
listened to
planning.
Tuesday, Wednesday.
I'm probably gonna go to that game.
Yeah, so that'll be a big matchup there, and they're both coming in hot. Like I mentioned, Hoy Names off wins over Troy and Mahonison, Shamont with wins over Cohoes and Troy. Just continue to plug along. All in all, I mean, those are really, you look at Class A, I'd say so far those are the three teams, along with Broad Alb and Perth, we'll mention in a second, but I want to focus specifically on those three teams, AHN, Academy, and Shelmont, and the different ways they bring success to the court for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, Academy is kind of easing into their schedule right now, right? Like, they haven't had one to circle yet. I think the season opener was last week, and it's for as good of a team as they are, they just haven't had a game that I've looked at and had a whole lot of intrigue or interest towards. That changes this weekend. They have Columbia coming up, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe on Sunday.
That is Sunday, the 22nd. Yep.
Yeah, so that's the first one that I look at for Academy. Like, if I'm debating on whether I want to leave town on Sunday or not. If I don't, then I'm definitely watching that game. That's the first one that I look at and think, that's a real kind of iron sharpens iron game for them.
And they have an interesting 5-game stretch there because it starts with home against Columbia this Sunday. Then they go to Utica for the Downtown Classic on the weekend after Christmas. They'll take on Central Valley on that Saturday. Syracuse Academy of Science that Sunday. And then they're on the road at Shaker. I'm trying to remember if that's oh, no, that's not. They're on the road at Shaker January 3rd, and then they're playing a neutral site at Siena College against Holy Names January 5th. So really an interesting 5-game stretch. Anytime you go to a holiday tournament, especially that's a little bit outside of your local frequency, and you're going into Utica, you're always expecting, a good level of competition. So that 5-game stretch coming up for Academy, I'd say once you get past the Cohoes game this Friday, those 5 games after that, those are really going to be a good measuring stick for them to see, where they are as of right now as a squad on both ends of the ball.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Syracuse Academy of Science game, that is not who they initially signed up to play. I think it was initially Liverpool on the schedule, and then for whatever reason that had to change. And that SAS game, I'm just gonna be like, that's a mismatch. But CVA is an interesting team. I think they should make a run in Class A in Section 3 this year. Fun fact: CVA's coach was my coach. This is my high school varsity coach, Coach Rich Shaw, who is a Section 2 alumna, a school that we actually spoke of earlier. He's a St. Johnsville guy, or was a St. Johnsville grad. That Schaff last name is synonymous with that area, St. Johnsville, Little Falls, that stretch of turf. But that'll be an interesting game. It is interesting, especially for an Albany team. I'll just be up front and say it, because that's, I travel and I go all over God's creation for this stuff. Sometimes the biggest thing to get acclimated to, for especially a Capital District team when you're going to Utica, is the whistle's very different. It doesn't, that never changes. It kind of is what it is. In my travels, Capital District, we tend to let our games, we tend to kind of across the board, it's a little bit more physical of a game. And so, a little bit more is we kind of err on the side of letting them rock a little bit. And then the Mohawk Valley board really has the most, you could call it the tightest whistle in my coverage region. I think the technical term would be literal interpretation of the rule book. 2 hands, foul, 2 touch, foul, period. Doesn't matter if it impacts play or not, foul. So that's something.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I will say this. That probably would have been helpful in their Ichabod Crane game last night because there were moments when Academy was pressing to start the second half, and Leanna Williams was not just getting pushed off, she was basically getting tackled by dribblers going into her. So, and obviously if you have a tighter whistle earlier on, that avoids that kind of thing to happen at any point in the game. So I'm not saying that might necessarily, it could be a one-off thing. Just with the way one school reacted to the pressure of another school on a certain night. But in a way, I think it might help a little bit. It could be a good thing or a bad thing. Good thing because it'll help prevent stuff like that potentially happening with Liana or any of the other girls. But again, it could also be in a bad way a good thing in that this is a very tenacious defensive-minded team on that Academy side with Leanna Williams, Maggie Zaya coming off the bench. Morgan Vian's a very tough defender. Alex Leonard is increasing her defensive intensity. So, it's a balance. You got to find that delicate balance, and it's something that you got to establish. I feel like that first quarter and a half of that first game when you go out there to just get an understanding of how things are going to sway in the pendulum there.
Yeah, the name of the game is always the officials are part of the scout. It is what it is. Like if you're really doing something, in complete fashion, the officials are part of the scout in the sense of how is the game going to be called, and you have to adjust to you have to adjust your play to and your expectations to how the game is being called. But I know that, and I'm from the Mohawk Valley. I've seen it. People that travel to the Utica area for games, they do have to adjust to. Yeah, it's a tighter whistle than most people see. Catholic Central they went to the Juggler Classic a couple times, and they ran into that especially with kind of the physical style that they play, and how the foul situation kind of racked up for them in a hurry. So yeah, you play that sort of style. You have to kind of adjust to, the name of the game is adjusting to how game's being called, because it's different. It could be different by the day. It could be different by the area. And it's what they're going to experience is probably a little bit more literal interpretation with the whistle. And I think that's good for them, even like getting these 2 games in at the Downtown Classic at the Nexus Center over holiday break. Probably good for them to feel that for a couple games, get that area experience for a couple games going into the Juggler Classic on Martin Luther King weekend, which we'll talk about probably 4 episodes from now. That will be, no matter how it shapes up, that'll be 2 very competitive games for them at Notre Dame, where it won't hurt to have that area experience. So yeah, they've got an interesting slate of games coming up with Columbia, and then they get the 2 out of area with Utica. CVA is going to be kind of an interesting little test. There's a difference in level of guard play there, but CVA's got a athletic forward, Izzy Terziowski, that can be kind of an Achilles heel for a lot of teams. They tested a very good Marcellus team that I think is state competitive in Class B a couple days ago. 3-point game on the road after 3, ended up losing by 9. And Izzy had 16 and 16, and she's kind of an Achilles heel for that sort of team too. Just 5'11", athletic, really aggressive. Some Section 2 people are familiar with her because she played with Cap City AAU this past year with the Perry twins and Sydney Pleat and Shea Canavan and so on and so forth. But interesting, well coached, and no, Coach Schaff is not paying me to say that. That's a legitimately well coached group at CVA. So that'll be an interesting test. And yeah, then coming out with the Shaker Holy names to start the new year. So now they're really kind of getting into the headlines of their season. So yeah, that's a lot of academy talk. And Holy Names and Shalmont, I'm probably going to that game tonight. I've tossed back and forth between a couple games, one that's a little more local being that, and then the other one being a little bit more of a drive. But as we speak, I think there's kind of a sharp weather gradient as far as who's getting rain tonight and who might be getting a little bit more snow. And the other game in which I was considering going to looks like it's going to be on the snow line of that. So as the hours go by, I'm leaning a little more towards Holy Name Shalmont. That should be interesting. I'm interested in that game as it's depth of the Colonial, and then it's a matchup. I don't necessarily want to say contrasting styles, but it's not a direct matchup. Where you have one team that has the commanding interior presence in Maggie Vollmer, another team that doesn't have that, so they have to account for it. But can they counter that by trying to play with as much pace as possible, stretch the floor? That should be an interesting test for both sides. Holy Names, other kids kind of coming into their own. I've brought up Lizzie Blanche on here a couple times already, but she's had a couple games where she's been a scoring threat for them, being able to space the floor. Gianna Savoca, I would expect to be, especially with where they're at this year, who they have, I would expect her to kind of be that sort of leadership presence. Like, she's not a huge statistical kid. It's, I don't think you're going to see 35-point nights from her at any point this year, but they're going to take those 12 to 15s from her whenever they can get it, and kind of that sort of leadership presence that brings them some athleticism and toughness in the backcourt. And they'll need that against Shalmont tonight with Ari Brandon and the Cirillas. Gianna, the old head, and Sandy, the young one.
Then obviously we can't go through Class A without mentioning Broadalm and Perth. They wrapped up their very condensed start to their schedule. They wrapped up that 6-game in an 11-day stretch with wins against Glens Falls at home last Tuesday by over 30, and then they won by over 30 again at Amsterdam last Thursday, putting them at 6-0 overall. They just keep chugging along. Now they're in a stretch where this week and next week, just one game each week before things kind of ramp up again for them. They're playing, I believe it's Hudson Falls on Thursday, as I open their schedule up one more time. Yeah, they're hosting Hudson Falls this Thursday before playing in that downtown classic at the Nexus Center next Friday, the 27th, against New Hartford. And then they'll ramp back up the things in Section 2 play the first full week of January. So Broadalm and Perth, challenging start with so many games crammed into an 11-day stretch, but when you're able to walk away 6 for 6, it's hard to challenge the strategery there. And now they get to reap the rewards of being able to kind of rest legs a little bit, only have one game each of the next 2 weeks, and then basically mentally and physically kind of prepare themselves for that stretch run through January and early February.
Yeah, definitely kind of an imbalanced schedule. Maybe not so much as far as the level of opponent, but not like it was a ridiculously strenuous as far as playing a bunch of dog fights. Like they did play 6 games in 11 days, but some of those, for lack of a better term, some of them were bench games. And in the foothills, the reality is they have a lot of bench games this year. They have teams that they should be able to put, go plus 30 to plus 50 over the course of 2.5, 3 quarters, and then just kind of put it on ice. So it's just, there's levels to this, and the Broad Albin team right now, like this Broad Albin team is on a different level than most that they see within their environment in the foothills and beyond. They really only had one dogfight out of those 6, the low scoring tilt when they beat Queensberry at home.
Yep.
Then there were a couple 20s to 30s, but a lot of 35, 39, 41. So it was, you look at it, looking back at it, good little stretch just to kind of see where they're, it's, although they were some lopsided affairs, you get that little early run, which I don't necessarily love for a lot of teams, but for this group, trying to figure out some things as far as like guard play, where, who do we go through in the half court offense? Like, we know what our defensive identity is. Let's kind of figure out our offensive identity. You get that little rush early in the year. You kind of have an idea through just that kind of maximum in-game reps. You get that idea of where are we right now? Like, who are we? Where are we? What do we need to work on? And go back and build from there. So, yeah, I mean, they went through unscathed, and I look at their schedule. And I think this is going to be a common theme just throughout the year. Look at their schedule right now in front of me, and there's not many that I circle. Like there's not many that I'm looking at saying, "Ooh, gotta really keep an eye on that one." They're just on a different level than most of their surroundings. I'll be a little interested in their game at New Hartford. I think New Hartford will have a lot of trouble with their length and their size, but that at least that is a team that has a plethora of competitive guards. So if they're able to play with some pace and create passing angles against the length of Broad Albin and keep turnovers down, maybe we got something interesting there. But it's another just kind of doing what they're supposed to do. And this is what they've built for.
And to bring things a bit full circle in our Class A discussion, to wrap it up, I'm assuming you have the Broad Albin schedule ahead of you, in front of you, I should say. Did you see who their last game of the season is before seedings come out?
The Fighting Coach Shoffs.
Yes.
The Thunder.
Just bringing the whole conversation full circle, because you mentioned CVA with their matchup against Academy Christmas week, and there you go. Wednesday, February 19th, if you're interested.
That was one when I saw that they added that. I'm like, oh, I might have to go to that game.
Yeah, because that's, I mean, I don't know if this is a proper phrasing, but I'd say it's pretty much a dead week, which is the way that things are lined up for seedings, because they push seedings, generally speaking, if I remember correctly, and you can call me out on this if I'm wrong, seedings, from what I remember, had always been like Mondays or Tuesdays or even Wednesdays. This year they're a Friday on the 21st. So like the way scheduling is set up for sectionals and beyond is just it feels really late to me, or I'm just getting old. I don't know what's going on, but it feels really late this year.
Yeah, I tend to think of seating as like a Tuesday, Wednesday sort of thing. Yeah, I didn't catch that. That is interesting. Maybe also a product of the season starting a touch later this year.
Right.
But that is interesting, and I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, not at all.
Like Wednesday seeding with first round 15 versus 18 seed games being Thursday always felt a little weird to me. So I'm okay with Friday. I'm okay with that Friday. And then even if they do have that the next day, if they're like, hey, we're gonna have our first rounders on Saturday, cool. The midweek thing always feels a little. I know a lot of sections do it, but it feels a little weird to me.
Yeah, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Having those extra couple days, as it's kind of like a dead week with seating being Friday.
Right.
I like having those extra days as far as like snow makeups.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it gives a little bit more. There's a little bit more leeway if weather actually does happen, that we can make sure that stuff gets made up without necessarily having teams run into these situations when you're already 2.5 months into the season grind, and now you're playing 4 games in 6 days.
Right.
I'm okay with that. That's usually a week that I leave the state.
So just give the breakdown real quick. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, looking 2 months ahead at the sectionals, but here's the breakdown for that. Seedings are Friday the 21st. Next day, there's going to be 2 classes that have play-in games, quote unquote, into the round of 16. That'll be classes B and C. Those will be the next day, the 22nd. And then round of 16 games for AA, A, and D are Monday the 24th, B and C Tuesday the 25th, and then all the quarterfinals will be Wednesday through Saturday. That's February 26th through March 1st. And then we start play at Hudson Valley for semis Sunday the 2nd. And then we're literally at Hudson Valley from that Sunday all the way through March 10th, except for Sunday the 9th, because I guess we're taking a day off between finals. we're doing A, B, C, and D Saturday the 8th, and then AA and AAA Monday the 10th.
Yeah, we're taking March 9th off so I can go out to Buff State and watch the Section 6 ones.
Well, there you go.
That's why. That's always, it's turned into my sort of annual tradition. Like we'll see. I didn't do Saturday's finals in Section 2 last year because they didn't interest me, to be completely, like, the C game did a little, Joinsburg Greenwich, but the B game didn't really, and whatever I think A was the other one, didn't really like move the needle for me. So I didn't do the Saturday finals last year.
Right.
I was in Section 5 for the.
Well, A would have been.
But I think this year's a little more interesting.
A would have been Catholic Central and
Holy Names.
Yes.
I watched it. I was there for the semifinals when they beat Broad Albin in the shootout.
Right. That's right. I keep forgetting about that. Yep. That's right. And then what's interesting, if you play in Class A or Class B, so if you're Mechanicville, Academy, Holy Names, Cooksaki, Maple Hill, whoever, you don't have to leave the 518 at any point once you start sectionals. Because sub-regionals for A and B are at Averill Park, and then your regional finals we played at Hudson Valley. So those are 2 classes that get that quote-unquote home court advantage, so to speak, until you get to states, when obviously they do a whole pool of officials from across the state. So,
and I think it matters most and not so much because of the it's not the official thing, but with those kind of middle classes, I think it matters the most having home court with regional stuff as much as possible, because the larger classes, and I know it's changed a little bit this year. We've went to a semi-new regional model, but it's not very different from what we've had. The larger classes, the pod has always been with Section 3, and
Still, double A players still 2 and 3. Yes.
Yeah, and a bus ride to Syracuse is one thing. A bus ride to Potsdam is very different.
Ask Brian Capitula about the bus ride to Potsdam last year.
Mm-hmm. So
it's a regular joke with us now.
That and the way that it works, if you've got say 2, 7, 10 in a pod, if 2 and 7 are playing each other, you're gonna have Section 10 officials, so on and so forth. I know when Dwaynesburg, for example, when they went up to Mariah, or they went up to Plattsburgh to play Mariah, the guys that they had were all Section 10 guys. So all those sorts of examples. But that bus ride to even Plattsburgh, even though it's a straight shot, the bus ride to Plattsburgh, and the mileage is kind of the same going from here to Syracuse versus here to Plattsburgh. The bus ride to Plattsburgh just feels different. The bus ride to Potsdam to Maxey Hall really, really feels different. Mm-hmm. And that one is different. It's more like 4 hours. So, having that sort, and you could say the same about North Country teams coming down here. So having those middle classes having the home court advantage, actually, I don't subscribe as much to the home court stuff necessarily, in comparison to others, just because it's that time of year, the court size is the same no matter where you go. You're playing on a 94-foot court. You're playing on a college court or college size court. The heights of the baskets are the same. The ball is the same. We're all talking the same. It's a neutral site, whatever. We're all talking the same stuff. But that's one where that sort of little triumvirate,
right?
It does. It really, that makes a difference. So, Section 2 team able to stay home and play, and not have to do that bus ride. It's an advantage.
Yeah. And another thing that I'll throw out there quick before I put a bow on this, we move on to AA and AAA from last week. Another way to look at it, and I don't think people think about this a whole lot, but it's something I hear every time a team comes in for the first time in a season to play there. The sight line at Hudson Valley is something you need to adjust to. Mm-hmm. Because it is drastically different than playing in a high school gym and usually having, a bare wall being up against behind the glass of the backboard. Whereas Hudson Valley, you're having open bleachers. So, yeah, it provides a different sight line for your straight-on shots. And I don't care what anyone says. I feel like, unless it's a real mismatch between two teams, I feel like having the experience of playing in that sight line is helpful when you get to those games and allows you to feel more comfortable because you're used to the locker rooms, you're used to the routine, you're used to this, like I mentioned, the sight line. So there's more than meets the eye, I feel like, sometimes when it comes to those matchups. As far as the pods are concerned, I mentioned AA and AAA are still 2-3 because they're not playing sub-regionals this year. The pods for A and B are 2-7 versus 3-10. And then Class C is 2 versus 7-10 because 2 is not in a sub-regional this year for Class C. And then Class D, that sub-regional is 2 hosting 11. And then the winner goes down to Poughkeepsie area against Section 9.
That's where it's really that's the only real change. B is a little bit, because did you say B was 2-7 versus 3-10?
Correct.
So that's a little bit of a change because 3 was always matched up with 4.
Yes.
And 2-7-10 was the same it was 2-7-10 as a triumvirate in B.
Mm-hmm.
Class D is where it's really changed because it used to be 2-7, and the downstate Long Island was mixed in with Section 4. For Section 2, that probably doesn't make that much of a difference, to be completely honest. I think that you're talking the strength of Class D, and this is, historic and current. The strength of Class D, you're talking Section 10. You're talking Section 4. And you've got kind of, pop-up strong teams in Western New York, whether it's 5 or 6. Like right now, probably, Elba, but a lot of times it's the southern tier of Section 6 with Panama and Sherman and those sorts of teams. 7 is a little weaker. Downstate is weaker when it comes to Class D just because there's so few. You're talking between 1, 9, and 11. And Section 8, which is Nassau County, doesn't have a Class D. So 1, which is like the Westchester, Rockland, Putnam counties, 9, which is Mid-Hudson Valley, and then 11, which is Suffolk County. And you're talking like a handful of Class Ds total to participate. So when 4 would play 11, it was just when 4 was in that, it was like you already knew you were playing Smithtown Christian because they were the only representative. So it has, that's where the real change is, just as far as like the actual numbers and where the travel is and all that. But just as far as the level and the quality and kind of, effectively, it doesn't really change things all that much.
So here's what's interesting, and I know I want to move on, but because you mentioned the 1-9-11 quarter, essentially. So obviously, Class D rankings last year finished with Hammond, the state champions, at 1, Northville, the state runners-up, at 2. You look at the entire top 20 from the end of season rankings last year. There isn't a single team from 1, 9, or 11 in there.
Yeah, I went down to Long Island that regional weekend for Long Island Championships, and it just so happened that the regional final for that group in Class D was the first game. I got there a little late. It was probably like halftime, but Cherry Valley, who ended up getting thumped by Hammond in the semifinals, but everybody got thumped by Hammond, so there's no shame in saying that. But Cherry Valley, who got beat up by Hammond the week after, beat up on Smithtown Christian had a kid that could play, and they made enough shots to make it so like it was high scoring enough that even though Cherry Valley had a sizable lead, it was like, hey, crazy things can happen. But Cherry Valley kind of thumped them. So yeah, there's just it's a large school. As people upstate ask about why did we go to 6 classes? There's so few AAAs. There's not so few AAAs downstate. There's more AAAs, as I'm gonna do the same thing and pull up stuff. Whereas we have like 7 triple, like 2, 3.
I think it's 8 no, I think it's 8 on the boys, 7 on the girls.
7 on the girls. Between 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Capital District, Central New York, Southern Tier, Rochester, Buffalo. Kind of doing this in my head, so my number might not be exact, but I think there's about 25-ish AAA girls basketball teams between those 5 sections. And then I'm counting up, there's 16 in Section 1 alone. So, and that doesn't include, I'm not even talking about Long Island, which has a heavy dose of AAAs as well. But like that's where you're talking when we go 6 class. it's a large school dominated region.
It's a population density factor.
Yes, absolutely. It's a different animal. And sorry, I'm going to do my part in continuing to ramble and go back to the Hudson Valley thing. I think it's something that's worth bringing up.
It's all right. We're geeking out. We're geeking out over sectional layouts. It's all good.
Yeah. But I think you made a good point about the sight line. And there's two things about Hudson Valley you have to get used to. Number one, it's cavernous. I think that's the best word that I've heard to describe HV. It's got a cavernous feel in the sense of, not just the fact that there's open space behind the basket, with like it's not a wall behind the basket. You've got the bleachers and all that, but also it's dark behind those usually. You're not looking at kind of the same lighting going towards the wall as you are. It's almost got a little bit of a spotlight feel to it. So that is something to get used to. And are there exceptions to the rule? Yes, there's always exceptions to every rule, but it kind of like the basketball cross training thing. Kids that tend to have, outside of just like your natural abilities of vision and depth perception, kids that tend to have more success shooting in those environments without needing a lot of experience, or without having to play there a lot beforehand, are AAU kids, are like high level AAU kids. Because I always say when you're talking about like exposure, big time AAU basketball, where like our programs are Havocs and our Elevates and our so on and so forth, our Team Northeasts and everything, Capitals, and they go on and play in these exposure based events. Yes, you're doing it for the purpose of the exposure, the visibility, playing in front of college coaches and all the competition level, so on and so forth. But in the process, you're playing in facilities that you're playing in convention centers. So you don't have a wall behind the basket. You go through an entire spring and summer where you're playing. There's not a wall behind the basket. It's just another court. So those, like when you're talking high level kind of exposure, like exposure AAU kids, they get a lot of that sort of built-in experience in the tournaments and the events that they play in, where you're playing on these, these massive convention center ballrooms with anywhere from 25 to like 85 courts, where you get that, where there's just, I always say it takes, as you're going from, as these kids naturally change from playing with like a local AAU outfit to a club that does more of those things. That's sort of, I always say, like, not saying that, such and such is quote too late, because everybody is different and it kind of serves, the club basketball serves its own purpose for everybody. But if you're going from one to the other, it's one level to another, it's always good to take into account that you're going to need a full year to adjust. And it's not just to the level of competition that you play and the expectations, but it's just the vibe. It's the vibe, it's the surroundings, it's the sort of environment and the sort of facilities that you play in. And I think that goes, one hand kind of washes the other there. But yeah, it takes a legitimate adjustment period for AAU kids to go from whatever basketball court to whatever convention center, because like there's just people walking behind the basket and there's another court, there's no wall. It messes with your depth perception. So I think there's something to be said about that as you go over to Hudson Valley and you're playing in front of, it's not the court, or it's not just a bunch of courts behind the basketball court that you're playing on, but it's a lot of open area.
And just to sum up something real quick, the reason I brought up the rankings to end the 23-24 season is because the first official rankings for this season They don't come out until after we're done recording this today, because the boys just came out yesterday on the 17th. Girls' first set of rankings come out today. So that's why I referenced the end of season rankings from last year instead of anything current. So
Circle back to that at the end.
yeah, we'll come back around to that. All right, double A real quick. Amsterdam started the week off well with a win over Gloversville, but then fell at home against Brougham and Perth. That's the word I'm looking for. They lose at home to Brougham and Perth, and then lose at Glens Falls the other night. Brougham and Perth, like we mentioned, they're long, they're athletic. Definitely got to a shorter, not as lanky Amsterdam team that's also very young, has a lot of growing to do in various ways. So bit mixed bag there. Also mixed bag for Averill Park. They like we mentioned, their loss at Shaker last week. That made bounce back against Burnt Hills on Friday night, and then they lose in overtime to our friend Rob Seitchen and Sister One with Syracuse on Saturday at Hudson Valley, and then they turn back around last night, and they're able to get the job done against Boston Spa, and they win by 34. So like very Jekyll and Hyde-ish of the last week and a half for Averill Park, in that when they looked good, they were good. When they looked average at best, they looked average at best. And that's really the most succinct way for me to sum up that Averill Park team with the way things have started so far.
The level of opponent that you're talking about from one to the next is very different. We've discussed this we've discussed it with Shaker, and I know I'm sure we'll talk about Shaker in a couple minutes, and they're kind of up and down stretch over the last week. But when you're talking about the development of their talent and their size and their athletes and their guard play and all of that, and CNS, their strength and their toughness and their athleticism, and you compare that to Burnt Hill's just a young team. Like, a young team can get overwhelmed. That's a smaller, younger group that they're going to have their success, but they also can get swallowed up by that level of athleticism, physicality, and that swarming sort of effort. Boston Spa, same sort of thing, and it would have been that way regardless, but that's the sort of game where they really kind of miss Sophia Lee, just, as like a stabilizing backcourt presence who can match, say, not to single anybody out, but like that Ari Verardi-ness, that relentless sort of, just the ability to fight fire with fire. So it's a very, I don't know if I would call it a Jekyll and Hyde for them as much as it is just the level of opponents kind of all over the place. Maybe it shows. I've brought up earlier, and I know I've said it in previous weeks, that this is one of those teams, like they've scored a lot, or they've been able to score a lot with the Amelia Wood era and the Taylor Holohan era, where they were able to finish possessions with points consistently, get up in the 60s, and it wasn't just defense fueling offense. Like, the defense never went away, but they could create their own offense. They could score late in the clock, and they had kind of positional inside out sort of offensive balance. Where this team is a little bit more kind of like those teams a handful of years ago, that there's a lot of 50 to 48s and 48 to 45s in recent years too, but they could also go. I know this one, went. I think the state semifinal last year with Hilton, that I probably shouldn't bring up, but they could go those sorts of games where it was 60s up into 70 range. without it being, that's one, like, you're not turning Hilton over, you're not turning those sorts of teams over, and you have to just generate your offense. You have to try and get stops, but you're not creating offense off of your defense by creating turnovers. You're not turning Mallory Heiss over, period. So you have to be able to create offense. They're able to create offense. Maybe this shows a little bit, like, if they're playing against a team that they're not really going to be able to turn over like that, and they have to create their offense, that's where you're going to see these numbers that are in the mid 40s to 50 kind of lie. They scored 44 in regulation against Shaker, and then the game against CNS, I think, was also 44 in regulation. It just happened to go in overtime and made it to 50 to 46. But whereas the other ones were more like low 60s sort of range against a couple teams that they could swallow up, as far as swarming on the defensive end, probably turn them over a good bit and able to create some points off of that. So it's early season stuff. I do think that there is going to be that trend where you're going to see some lower scoring games from them, and they have to sweat out games that are a little bit more nip tuck. But it's still, like, this will be a team, when they're in the half court, they will have to rely on some execution, because they don't have the kid that you dump the ball down to in the block, and you're able to just kind of play through with Taylor. It's not a team. They've, Kaylee Ahern can shoot the three, but it's not like a team of shooters that can space the floor. So I think, they're going to have to rely a good bit on execution if it turns into a half-court scoring game. And just what it showed against Shakers, they're not quite there yet with that. But it's early, mid-December. So if you go, if I watch an Averill Park game in a month and Coach Oregon's calling out a play, and there's 3 kids that know what they're doing and 2 kids that aren't. No, okay, that's a real problem for them. Right now, it's just growing pains.
And then last thing we want to discuss real quick in Double A, Catholic Central. We haven't really talked about them since that Thanksgiving weekend tournament at Colony, where they were able to split between Shaker and Colony, the victory over Colony, and then the loss by 4. The win over Shaker and the loss by 4 to Colony. But then in the last 7 to 8 days, they came out where we got conference wins: home against Lansingburg, at Voorheesville, then back home against Troy. And then they got a few more league games coming up. They're at Ichabod Crane this Friday, where Albany Academy was just last night. Then they have, I don't know if they just haven't posted any holiday week games or not. But the schedule I'm seeing, they have nothing going on until January 7th, when they go to RCS and then LaSalle on the 10th. So I want to say they're playing during the holiday break. I'm not positive, though. If they're not, though, I feel like, based on the rumored conjecture I've been hearing about this Catholic Central squad, that could be very beneficial for the Crusaders. I don't know what you're seeing with their schedule. I'm just going based on the reference I have. But Catholic Central, they're just, they're putting in the work they need to get through the schedule, and obviously the real big matchups will be coming up on about a month or so. January 14th at home, and 17th at home against Academy and Holy Names.
Yeah, I actually don't remember whether you're probably looking at the schedules on the Colonial website, and none of their non-league stuff is on there. So I don't remember.
I'm going to try a different resource real quick to see if I can figure it out.
Whether they're playing over the break. Not this past weekend, but the previous one, while things like the Averill Park tip-off tournament were happening, they went down. They took a couple of losses, but it was kind of a beneficial competition experience. They went down to the Bronx and played in Joe Fennelin's Slinky Showcase. Had a really close game with Ursuline on a Section 1, where the Sophie Nascimento, their Sacred Heart commit, scored in the final seconds to win by 2, and then and they kind of took one on the chin against Monsignor Scanlon, who's one of the top 5 teams in New York City. So they got tested down there. I think they go back to the city, maybe over Martin Luther King. They might be playing in the Rose Super Jam, but I'm almost positive they're playing in the Rose Super Jam, and I will pull that schedule up.
Yeah, while you're pulling that up, so Max Preps at Schedule Galaxy, which I don't think they're even on. I even just checked their huddle. They have no game scheduled for the week of Christmas or the week after Christmas. So they basically have set themselves up. So once they finish their game at Ichabod Crane on the 20th, they're literally going to have 2.5 weeks off before going to RCS.
Yeah, not the worst thing. Play kind of like a punishing bruising style, and it's another. They got tested twice down in the Bronx, and you kind of see where you're at. Get a couple of these league games in, hit the reset button, and yeah, they are playing in Martin Luther King. They're going back down to Brooklyn, playing the Rose Super Jam, where they play New Dorp out of Staten Island. They're actually an interesting one on Sunday. They'll play Springfield Central, Massachusetts, was also a team that's kind of reminiscent of like an Albany High. So they'll go back down there. So they're getting a lot of their non-league stuff in the city. They've just kind of going their own way. The league schedule is what. So yeah, that's probably 14 league games. They played their 2 in Colony, they played 2 in the Bronx and 2 in Brooklyn. So yeah, man, they're kind of going their own way with their non-league scheduling, and league schedule is what it is. They're kind of a different animal. They'll only get a couple tests. They'll get the academy test. Holy names is always, you get Catholic High holy names, even if I've been to that when it's lopsided, and I've been to it when Holy Names has tested them a little bit, but it's always intriguing. I think it's something that they always kind of get up for. But yeah, just early season stuff for Catholic High. Seems like Amia Rodriguez had I'm just kind of only going off of Joe's Instagram video, but seems like Amia Rodriguez had, we've talked about this before with Ella DeBacco, unfortunately being out for the duration of the season, and how you kind of fill that void. And the natural thought is Mia Rodriguez pitching into that spot in the starting unit, the backcourt, and providing relief for Dior that Ella has provided in recent years. And seems like Mia is sliding into that sort of role. Looks like she had a little bit of success in the Bronx. So just business as usual for them. So it seems.
Yeah. And then AAA, I mentioned this before the start of the year. I mentioned this, I believe, in our season preview a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to say it again. They're all just going to beat each other up, man, in AAA. That's all they're going to do. We'll start with probably the most Jekyll and Hyde-ish of the Jekyll and Hydes from AAA from the last week and a half. That's Shaker. They go and they end up with a nice second half push, beating AP by 21. Then they turn around and lose to Guilderland. and then they come back last night and they rout Albany by 20. I don't know. It's and that's not me trying to put down Gillen necessarily, but everybody knew coming into the year, Gillen was kind of in a slight rebuild phase in that, yeah, they have Brooke Lilly, yeah, you have Christina Williams, but compared to the other AAA teams, there was a lot of sense that, you know, the new head coach, Jeremy Friel, and his squad on the Dutchman, they were going to be on the lower end of things. But when they beat Shaker last week, it was kind of eye-opening in that, oh, like, what is this? What is this a resemblance of? Who is this a reflection of more? But then when you see Shaker turn right around and go, okay, we'll figure it out, and then they do what they do against Albany last night, you kind of just, you know, want to kind of pull your hair and
Gilderland loses to Niski as
and you try to figure out if A plus B equals C at this point. Right now, it feels like A plus B equals F. It's like I don't know anymore.
It's just, and I always have to kind of remind myself of this. We're talking high school basketball, and I bring up the word consistency over and over again. But as much as you would love consistency to be a prerequisite and an expectation, what consistency really does is it separates the good from the great. You know, it's tough to find consistency, you know, with you know, in high school basketball, and I think that's where, you know, a team like Averill Park has kind of found, you know, that's what's really separated them is the consistency. Last year, we talked, I know it's out of section, but we talked about Utica Notre Dame a little bit last week. And I think that's what I think that's something that they have found with this group, with Trinkus, so on and so forth, is not every day is your best day, but even if it's a 50%, you find a way. Right? So, you know, I think that's what Shaker will have to understand. On top of the whole just finding the consistency and bringing a steady approach to everybody that you play, is yes, they went from making in 1 week, they went from making a statement to being someone's statement and then making a statement again. And this is Shaker, and this is everybody that's at this is Colony, this is AP, this is Academy, this is Greenwich, this is Northville for the small schools, right? You have the target, you know, those sorts of teams, you have the target on your back. You know, like you are kind of the benchmark. You're at that level compared to your environment. You have the target on your back. You're going to get everyone else's best effort. So when you have that target and you get everyone else's best effort, it happens, but you know, you'll maybe get, and it's a little bit different around here because boys and girls play at the same time. Stupid scheduling where boys and girls play at the same time at opposite sites, which limits the crowds for girls basketball games. That's an entirely different discussion that we can get into some other time. But you know, you're going to get, maybe if you're lucky and that doesn't happen, you'll get the student sections, right? Like those are the games that you'll kind of get a little bit more of a juiced crowd for. So having, you know, treating every opponent with that same sort of approach and that same sort of reverence, even if it's a different level of, like, if you beat Averill Park by 20 and you have Guilderland next, it is what it is. And you also have Albany the week after that. That's the definition of a trap game. You look over, you know, you beat Averill Park, you got Albany coming up. Guilderland might be a team that you look over. And we're just using this as an example because it happened. But everybody has these games that could fall in under trap games, where Guilderland, from a talent perspective, they're not chopped liver. They're not a complete team. I just watched them. but they certainly have their own flaws when it comes to producing a consistent level sort of stretch. It's very ebbs and flows, mountains and valleys with them. But you're going to get their best. You're going to get everybody's best. So with that, you have to treat, everybody that you play kind of with that same sort of reverence. And my initial thought is you bump into that. You beat AP, you get Albany next. You just scrimmaged Gilderland 3 weeks ago and you put it on them. So you go in not taking it seriously. And life happens. It's you don't ever I've been in that sort of locker room before where I remember a time when I was playing, we beat a team by 31 on the road the first time around. And we fell into a trap game. This is also when I was in high school. And we kind of fell into that trap game where we had them at home and lost by 1 on a shot with like 15 seconds left. You don't want to be in that locker room. You certainly don't want to be at that practice the next day. It's been almost 20 years. I still remember what that practice was. But those are, if it's going to happen, it's a lesson that is hopefully learned, but one that's also learned in like the 4th or 5th game of the year, not the 22nd. Looking past the quarterfinalists, thinking about what your semifinal opponent's going to be. So, yeah, sucks. That's one you feel like it just kind of can't happen. But mid-December,
Yeah,
bet on girls basketball. Do it.
Yeah.
Lose your money.
Another way to look at it too is it can kind of say the same in a way. But I feel like it's a little different circumstance here though. With Colony, because it came out, they looked good against Cardinal O'Hara to start the year, as well as grinding out that 4-point win against Catholic Central and that, like I mentioned, that Thanksgiving weekend tip-off classic they had. But then they had 2 weeks off essentially of no games, just practices. They might have had a scrimmage at some point, not exactly sure, but still 2 weeks off with no gameplay, like actual gameplay, is 2 weeks without actual gameplay. And that might have come back to bite them a little bit in the loss at Columbia by 11 last Friday. But then they were able to turn it around at Saratoga last night with a big a win by over 40 over the Blue Streaks. And now they have to prep for a matchup tomorrow night hosting Shen before, like you mentioned, I don't know if I can't remember. Oh, you mentioned this off air, but the game you might go to for them on Monday, that's non-league, not even anyone in Section 2, which we'll get to a little bit. But yeah, Colony, they lose to Columbia. Olivia Landy gets her 1,000th point, and Columbia, I know they're double A, but they're able to win at Colony, or against Colony. They beat Red Hook at Hudson Valley over the weekend. They take care of Burn Hills Boston Lake last night. I mean, they're making me eat words a little bit early on here in this Suburban Council schedule thus far.
I'll start with Columbia and then kind of go to Colony. Yeah, I mean the Columbia, the C word again with them. I've talked about this with them. Pretty much the
ad nauseum in a way. Ad nauseum in a way.
Yeah, consistency, but maybe this is them finding it with Averill Park last year. They play them really tough at AP for a half, and then things go south in the second half. Averill Park this year to start the year, it's a dogfight for 32 minutes. They end up losing by 2, but it's a dogfight for 32. Colony game, they jump on them. Yes, Colony maybe a little rust, whatever, a couple of weeks off, but you're going to get as Colony again, you're going to get everyone's best effort. Columbia's best effort's pretty freaking good. It's a very that's a team that can provide a very good best effort.
And if there's a team that can figure it out and make people second guess that it's Catholic Central and then the field in AA, it's Columbia, because like we mentioned before, that triumvirate of the senior Kendall Ouimet, senior Olivia Landy, junior Sarah Rainville, you know what they have. It's about, like you said, the consistency and the supporting parts. If they contribute at a level that's not going to give you a massive drop-off from Rainville, Landy, Ouimet, that makes AA a whole lot more interesting than we might have originally thought it was going to be.
Rainville's their X factor to me. Like, that's Sarah Rainville is kind of who I look at and say, when Sarah Rainville gets going, they're at their best. Liv produces, like, you're going to see whether it's a good Liv game or a not as good Liv game, she's going to produce just because she's relentless and she's going to make an impact on the game. If it's smooth, great. If not, she's still just kind of like toughness and athlete and competes her way to 16 and 10. When they are able to have that legitimately be a big three, with Sarah being a key piece, they're very difficult. And I think that was the first thing that popped to me with Columbia Colony was Olivia scoring 1,000 points, just career milestone. But then looking, more deeply into the box score and seeing Sarah had 20 in that game, that is, when I see that sort of, not, it doesn't have to be 20, but when I see that she is there in that mix, that's when I think they're at their best. So, yeah, they jumped on them. I think it was a 15-point game at half. This Columbia team has had its moments over the years. This is probably, from a scholastic perspective, this is probably the best win that they've had. In this era of Kendall, Liv, and Sarah. And it appears as though it was start strong, wire to wire, kind of set the tone and end-to-end win, kind of comprehensive performance. So, this is probably the best, at least on paper, it's probably the best win that they've had with this group. And yeah, you get all three. You get Liv, Kendall, and Sarah all kind of carrying weight and producing. It's a really difficult, it's a really difficult team to play. So that's a good win really good win for them. Colony, not worried about them just because Columbia is very good. Columbia can do that to anybody in Section 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and it just so happened they did it to Colony. So, that'll happen. And you could go back to that same point of you're going to get everyone's best effort, and you have to maintain the sort of consistent approach. But that's a good team. That sort of thing is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could probably go at least 6 deep in the Suburban,
mm-hmm.
where if you just take any of those 6, just like take 2 names out of a hat and say, you 2 play each other, it's worth watching. Just because you don't really know what's going to happen any given day. So that's a That's kind of what it's shaping up to be.
And one thing I really like is that going forward, both these teams are really going to challenge themselves, but in slightly different ways. Colony, it's quality of opponent wise. In a way, they're both good quality opponents, but particularly Colony, they have a stretch where they're going into games versus Shen on Thursday night. The non-conference game I played at Bard College against Albertus Magnus on Monday, which I believe are the reigning AAA champions, if I remember correctly.
Reigning AA, now in AAA.
Right. Okay. Yes, correct. And then they play back-to-back days, the 20th and 29th, in the Amsterdam Showcase against Seminar Saint Francois from Canada and More Catholic. Whereas Columbia, on the other side, more games with, and I can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's a mixed bag of quality. They'll be playing at Schenectady. They're hosting Schenectady this Friday. Then they'll play at Albany Academy on Monday. Yeah, my math's right. No,
Sunday, right?
Sunday.
22nd.
My math is not mathing. Yeah, that's Sunday. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. This one messed me up. Schenectady's tomorrow night. The 19th is a Thursday. Wow, I really did bad math. Schenectady's tomorrow night. Albany Academy is Sunday. Then they play 3 in a row at Amsterdam in the showcase, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Or excuse me, no, they're playing the AP tournament Friday, Saturday. There we go. Now I'm reading it right. They're playing the AP Holiday Tournament next Friday and Saturday against Harrison and Our Lady of Lourdes. Then they'll play at Amsterdam Sunday the 29th against Binghamton. So more games for Columbia, but I feel like the quality opponent maybe slightly leans towards Colony in a way. So you get to find out in 2 slightly different ways what the mettle of each team is.
Yeah, it's a steady quality of opponent for Colony.
Right.
Where Shed, they're different styles of teams, but you get Shed, you get them at Colony, you get them on your home court on Thursday. And then Albertus, where the way they're at, I just watched Albertus over the weekend down in Scranton against a Gill St. Bernard team from New Jersey that is more like a cheat code than a high school basketball team. You go 6'6", going to UConn, 6'3", going to Navy, 5'11" wing, Hyde D1 kid. So that's what Albertus had to go up against over the weekend. But so I saw them against Albertus has a loaded schedule, but I saw them against probably the best team that they'll play all year. But yeah, you go from Shen to Albertus, which is reminiscent of like a Dwight Howard Orlando Magic sort of team where they had the dominant interior presence and just tried to play around him with floor spacers and shooters. They did have 2 bigs if you saw them in August at the annual Battle of New York team camp that Joe Murphy puts on with Shen at Impact. If you saw them there or if you saw them last year at Hudson Valley, they had 2 bigs with Julia Scott and Micaiah Beasley, the daughter of Michael Beasley. Micaiah Beasley's no longer there. Right before the school year started, she transferred to South Shore in Brooklyn. So it's Julia Scott and just guards and floor spacers around her. Mix of returners and some younger new faces that they're trying to figure all that out right now. They're in early season mode at this point. But that's that you go from somebody that doesn't have, Shen's got Kate Milham and Gianna Winter, but you can't call either of them a true big. They're their own style of front court player. Neither of them are really, they can play a little bit with their back to the basket, but they're not natural back to basket players. Where you move to Julia Scott, who is, the second best, legit, like the second best natural back to basket forward in the state of New York, and only the second best because Olivia Vicosa exists at Christ the King, who is on track to be a future pro. So, that that's something that they just don't get anywhere else on their schedule. SSF out of Quebec, they were pretty good last year. They also came to Amsterdam for a couple games. they're improved this year. They have a stud that she was good for him last year, Amelia Sau, but just a Power 5 sort of player that leads them. They're very good. More Catholic, different, kind of more Catholic is a little bit more Shen-y, but another kind of very good opponent. So they go across the line with some strong opponents. Columbia, yeah, up and down. Would you say Schenectady? And then you take the Schenectady game, you kind of lead into Albany Academy with that. And then Harrison Lords, Harrison Lords, Section 1, Section 9. I think this is Harrison's first time upstate, playing upstate. They have, I don't think they're quite what they were strong last year. I don't think they're quite what they were last year. They graduated, they kind of had a two-headed monster. They graduated one of them, but they have a very good guard that leads them. And Mia Straza. Mia was she really kind of a scholarship level player, could potentially be playing Northeast 10 basketball, but committed to, I am fact checking myself on this one, but I believe that she committed to Emory in Georgia. Very, very high academic D3 that has been recruiting that, particularly that sort of tri-state region. They've pulled some kids from pulled a couple kids from Jersey, and now they're getting into Rockland County. Yeah, she's going to Emory. But really nice player for Harrison. That they'll work around her. Lords, I had the chance to watch Lords, not this past Sunday, but the previous one. No, Simone Pellish might be gone, but they're still good. I think that's a good test for Columbia. It's a very different sort of team than what Lords was last year. But I had the conversation with Adam Pellish before they played, Simone's dad, and she's got a younger sister on the team, Sophie. It's just like solid complementary role player type, having fun playing basketball. And he's like, I love this team. I always tell Simone, you guys thought you played hard, but can't wait until you see this team. I didn't know what playing hard looked like until I watched these guys. He was talking about how defense kind of leads that group, and he's like, we're a 40 and under team. And I watched him play Kennedy Catholic, was pretty good, and that's what it was like. 30. They had Kennedy Catholic at 39 with like a minute left. He looks at me, he's like, "What'd I say?" Like, yeah, that was Columbia plays against kind of like a 40 and under defense with Lords, so that'll be a nice test for them. And who'd you say finish off with Binghamton High at Amsterdam?
Yep.
Okay, so kind of a rough and tumble, physical, scrappy group to finish off. So they're all over the place with the styles of opponents, and yeah, the quality of opponent kind of has its ups and ups and downs and middle of the roads and all that, but that's that it's useful to see a lot of different styles, I think, from a team perspective, where you're not playing the same type of teams throughout the year. So you've got academy, and academy is very different from Binghamton, and Lords and Harrison are different, and it'll be kind of I think their biggest test of mettle might actually come when they play Binghamton, because it'll be their third game in 3 days at a neutral site, and Binghamton isn't the best team that they're going to play over those 5, but they're physical. They're very physical. So you play your third game in 3 days, coming right off a holiday against a team that makes you literally feel them. I think that might be where their mettle might be tested the most. But
last team I want to touch on from AAA before we wrap up, Shenandoah, 2 for 2 so far in the year, including a really grinded out victory over Bethlehem on Saturday at Hudson Valley. Wound up winning 50-39, but if even the 11-point deficit, I don't think is as close as that game felt. As the person who was announcing that game, it was, and it wasn't even like there was a lot of foul trouble for Shen, but it was just very much a grind. And I feel like for as long and lanky and talented as they are in their starting 5, particularly with Winter, Milham, Soden, and Weber, I think it's a struggle for them right now. I know it's weird saying that about a 2-0 team, because I feel like once you get past that starting 5, there's a lot of question marks with almost zero varsity experience. You have 3 folks on the bench right now. Grace Parsegian got some minutes off the bench, but it was really just that starting 5 that played that entire 32 minutes, more or less, aside from a couple minutes here and there from transitioning the start of one quarter to another. And I feel like that's just going to be a question that hopefully Shen can answer, which is why I think the fact they are playing 3 games in 3 days at Amsterdam is going to be very helpful for them, because they're playing schools out of the area that will give them an ability to use it as a science experiment, I feel like. I feel like this is going to be a very telling Christmas weekend coming up for Joe Murphy, and trying to figure out just what the depth is past that 5 of Parker, Winter, Milham, Soden, and Weber, because I think that might have been part of why that game against Bethlehem played so close, is that he's still figuring out his trust level past that 5. And you know Joe better than I would, despite how long I've known him. You know him better than I do, so maybe you might have a little better perspective on this than I would. But I feel like maybe that might be part of the reason why the Bethlehem game was such a grind. Granted, Bethlehem only lost to Albany by 1 too, so it's not like Bethlehem is a complete slouch. I feel like that could have been a game where Shen could have won by 20-25, and just because of a lack of confidence, per se, maybe, from coach about his bench, that it only ended up being 11, because he literally played, like I said, that starting 5 almost every minute of that game.
Well, if you watch them in the summer and whatever, it was going to be pretty clear. And they do some fall stuff too. I think they're pretty active in the fall as far as their open gyms and doing some things collectively as a unit. It was apparent that the depth was this team's biggest question mark, or the biggest thing they're going to have to work through, where your starting 5 was intact, but it was, how much do you get from your bench? Where can you go on your bench as far as like trustworthy minutes? That was something that's not really hitting them now. They knew that. I wasn't there. Perhaps it's once you get into the winter, like as much as like I've made the comparison, which isn't a fair one, because this team was a boys team that I think won a state and maybe federation championship like this. But I was like, oh, it's going to be like a Coach Jim Matei Scotia team a decade ago, where it was just like Cremo, Paleshi, Lamorta, Stapera, whatever. They just played 5 kids for 31 minutes and 46 seconds. And
which
then,
was psychotic because I remember calling both of their Federation games that year. At the time, what was the Times Union Center, and going, how is Coach getting away with this? And that's just how good they were. That's just how deep they were with the level of talent on that front line. That's just how good they were.
yeah, and the conditioning level comes into play there. But I've made that remark before. It's like, it's gonna be just like a Coach Jim Matei Scotia team where it's true. We're gonna run with these guys. But yeah, it's with early in the season, get kids in the game, try to give players off the bench some opportunities, learn a little bit about your team, and if you run with 5 all year, your kids are gonna. I mean, kids get in foul trouble, kids get hurt, kids get tired. You can't wear on them like that over the course of the year. Plus, you try to give your Tegan Folks and Olivia Littlejohns and whoever, get them some in-game experience and kind of see what you can get out of them. They're not deep, just as far as like when they're deep as far as like quantity of players, but when you're playing, when they play the Colonies and Shakers and Averill Parks and Albany's and Columbia's and Bethlehems of the world, they're not deep, and there is that sort of question mark beyond the starting 5, and even within the starting 5, it's the good thing about the starting 5 is it can be anybody on any given night. It can be a Milham day, it can be a Winter day, it can be a Maya Parker day.
And they're built
Soden, whatever. But it's just kind of figuring out like what kind of minutes and what kind of production, maybe not necessarily scoring, but just positive play you can get from beyond that. And that's going to be that's going to be a year-long thing for them.
And that starting 5 is very much built. They're basically AAA, a AAA version of BP. As far as that starting 5 is long, lanky, and athletic. From 3 to 3, 4, 6, 9 sport player at Gianna Winter. I kid with her that she does way too much, but that's whatever. From her to Caitlin, so they're all long. So if you get in a position where you have a little bit of a smaller team, like they're going to force you into some tricky situations with that length. So I mean, again, there's no doubt about that 5. It's like we've said, just getting past it, basically.
Yeah, that's this is a competitive Shen group. They're going to bump into some tough moments and issues throughout the year. Just in certain matchups because of the lack of depth, as far as like lack of depth against the best teams that they play, because Murph doesn't schedule, you play in the Suburban, but then on top of that, Murph doesn't schedule slouches. So, for his non-league stuff. So they'll bump into some tricky moments with the lack of depth, but this is still a competitive group and those sorts of things may happen as well, where you feel like, they should be up a little bit more. But that'll happen. It's still a competitive group, and it's a group of, you're also talking like with that starting 5, you're talking junior, freshman.
Yep.
Then players that when he does go to the bench, that you may see a little bit more often. Like I mentioned, Tegan Folk, freshman, Jordan Gurney, sophomore. So you're talking a lot of kids that will be multi-year in this sort of role as well. So year of growth.
Yeah. Real quick before I let you go, I know we're kind of midweek here, but have you figured out your travels for from now through we'll say now through well, I already gave away your travels for Monday. You're kind of tossed up between the Colony Magnus game and another game later in the day. But what does the rest of this week leading up to Monday look like for you?
Yeah, this one's actually pretty cut and dry. So Wednesday today, I am still semi-debating. I'll take another look at the forecast and see exactly what the weather is looking like for a particular area. Right now, I'm leaning towards going Chalmot with Holy Names in town, Colonial game, and we talked about that a while ago already. The other one that I was thinking about was small school, corner of Section 3, Battle of whatever hill that's called, Bunker Hill, I don't even remember. But it's my area, my old area, with Dolgeville hosting West Canada Valley, which Dolgeville, you would get this one, Dolgeville Section 3, but it is in the readership zone of the old Leader Herald readership zone, which is now technically Gazette.
Absolutely.
So that one should be interesting. That's just like a natural rivalry, West Canada, Dolgeville. West Canada's decent little small school. Dolgeville's been pretty good the last couple of years. They had a kid, Peyton Comstock, just scored 52 in a game to start the week off. So I was thinking about that, but it's looking like Dolgeville is probably going to be on the snow end of the rain snow line. So might end up going to Chalmot. Thursday, it's looking like Shen Colony for me. And then Friday, Saturday, I go out to Buffalo. Friday, I'm anticipating getting out there in time for interesting large versus small school game. Orchard Park, who I think should make a good run in Double-A out there, plays. They host Frewsburg. Frewsburg is looking like they made it to Hudson Valley last year in Class C, and they're looking like a force in C this year. And then Saturday, kind of a day-long intriguing event. They have a public versus private showcase in Buffalo, 5 games at St. Mary's Lancaster of Section 6. Again, they split public-private out there. Their public schools are Section 6, and their private schools like O'Hara and St. Mary's, Sacred Heart, Nichols, they're in Monsignor Martin Association, their own private league, and they play in the CHSAA. There's a ton of overlap in season. They play each other a bunch of non-league, but they've got 5 games at St. Mary's with a couple real headliners of St. Mary's, Williamsville South play each other. North Tonawanda and O'Hara play each other. Should be a fun game. So I'll be out there for that. I may cut out kind of early on because Lancaster, Madison Francis hosts Bria Watkins and Webster Schrader, which St. Mary's is in Lancaster, Lancaster High School, less than 5 minutes away. So I may catch a little bit of the beginning of public versus private, go over to watch Schrader Lancaster, then come back for the last 3. So I've got that. Saturday, come back Saturday night. Sunday, I'm kind of up in the air. Depends on how nutty I feel and how tired I am. If I'm up for a drive, I just get a couple hours of sleep and I go east. There's a big prep event, the Nickerson Classic. I may go to that. If I don't go to that, I got Columbia Academy.
Okay. Webster Schrader, by the way, will be in Amsterdam next Sunday against Shaker on the 29th. So
there you go.
We'll see what Bria Watkins can do there. This is going to be, I think, Webster Schrader's 3rd year in a row in Amsterdam for the showcase.
Yes.
They were there. Yeah, because they were there for 2 years ago when they went on to the state title. Last year when Bria's sister,
Mariah was out.
She was out for the year with an injury her senior year. And now Bria comes back for a 3rd year in a row. My schedule's pretty easy. Friday night, doubleheader. Johnstown girls hosting, I want to say Mayfield. No, Galway. Galway is who they're hosting. Then Saturday, I'm splitting time between Union College and the night-ending doubleheader at Siena College for the Coach versus Cancer event, and then Sunday all day at Siena for that. That's my schedule. I'm sticking to it, and then and then I'm picking up random Johnstown boys games too. That's my Monday night or Monday afternoon, I should say. They're playing a random noon 1:30 boys JV varsity doubleheader against Scotia. Because I guess the kids are getting 2 full weeks off this year because of the way Christmas is midweek. So
Yep.
good for the kiddies. They get to stay home. So if you live in Johnstown, pack the shoebox that is Johnstown High's gym for a Monday afternoon till against Scotia Glenville. Yeah.